Today we're going to look at finding the axis of symmetry and vertex of quadratic functions. Quadratic functions make this parabola shape. And it's important to know that a parabola is symmetrical, okay, which means that we can divide it in half and have both sides be the same. Parabolas are divided in half by something called the axis of symmetry. It's a vertical line that goes right down through the middle of the parabola and divides it into two halves that are going to be symmetrical. Now again, it's a vertical line, which means our equation for the axis of symmetry is going to start out the same way any other equation would for a vertical line, which is x equals. Now the other thing that I want you to notice, and this will be important later on, is that this axis of symmetry goes right through either the highest point or the lowest point of your parabola. We call that point, that highest or lowest point, the vertex, okay? And so here's an example of the highest point and the lowest point. And the other thing I'm going to teach you, in addition to finding the axis of symmetry, is I'm going to teach you how to find this vertex. The vertex is a point. So although we write the axis of symmetry as x equals like an equation, the vertex is actually going to be written as an ordered pair, okay? And since this axis of symmetry goes right through the vertex, the x value for our axis of symmetry and the x value for our vertex are going to be the same. So the formula we use to find the axis of symmetry is x equals negative b over 2a. Now where do these letters come from? Well, what you need to think about is what an equation looks like in standard form. Standard form is y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. Those letters, that a, that b, that c, they refer to the numbers. So the a is going to refer to our number or our coefficient that's in front of our x squared term. The b refers to the coefficient that's in front of our x term, and the c is going to be my number that's all by itself. Now this formula doesn't have any c's in it, but eventually we're going to get to a formula that does need a and b and c. Now before we get started with this formula, the last thing I want to break you aware of is the negative sign here. It's negative b over 2a. So whatever value you have for b, you have to take the opposite of that value when you plug it into your formula. Okay, so here we have our equation, 2x squared minus 4x minus 5. The first thing I usually do is figure out what a and b and c are. And I always write it off to the side because it helps me when it comes to plugging things in. A is my coefficient in front of my x squared term. B is going to be my coefficient in front of my x term, which is negative 4 here. And c is my number that's all by itself, which in this case is negative 5. So when it comes to using this equation for my axis of symmetry, it's x equals negative b. Well, my b value is negative 4. So it's negative b, negative 4, over 2 times a, and my a value was 2. Now negative 4 is just going to be 4, because it's like the opposite of negative 4. So that gives me 4 over 2 times 2, which is 4, which gives me an answer of x equals 1. That x equals 1 is my axis of symmetry. And remember, I have to write it as an equation because it's a vertical line, x equals 1. Because that vertical line right here, this was my x equals 1, it's going to go through our parabola right through my vertex. I know that the x value of my vertex is also going to be 1. So the way I figure out what the y value of this vertex is I go back to my standard form equation, and I'm going to take this value for 1 and plug it into this equation. So I get y equals, and everything else is going to stay the same. So my a value stays the same, but instead of x, I'm going to plug in a 1. My b value is going to stay the same, except in x, instead of x, I'm going to plug in 1. And then finally, my c value stays the same. And now from here, it's strictly order of operations in order to solve this. We do exponents first. So I get y equals 2 times 1, because 1 squared is 1. And then I have my minus 4 times 1, and then minus 5. So now it's time to just do multiplication. So 2 times 1 is 2. Negative 4 times positive 1 is negative 4. And then there's negative 5 on the end. And then I just combine everything together, and I see that y equals -7. Now remember, this is not my answer. My answer, this y value of 7, -7, gets plugged into here to be my vertex. So my answer for my vertex is 1, -7. Oops. And that's what you get for your vertex. So remember, vertex is always going to be written as an ordered pair. Let's try another one. Okay, first things first. A, this is a tricky one. All we have here is -x². So that negative tells me that it's a negative, but since there's no number in front of it, it's a -1. My B is +4, and my C is -1. Now to find my axis of symmetry, don't forget this formula. -b over 2a. So x equals negative, this time my v value is just 4, so it's -4 over 2 times a. And my a value is -1. So when I multiply all this out, I get x equals -4 over -2, which gives me an x value of +2. That's my axis of symmetry. Okay, so now comes time to plug this in to find our y value. We're going to start with this equation. Everything stays the same except my x value that I'm going to plug in is going to be a 2. So I get y equals negative, and then I plug in my x, 2 squared plus 4, and instead of x, I've got that 2 value again, and then -1. And then again, back to order of operations. Y is going to equal -2 times 2 is 4, okay, plus 4 times 2 minus 1. And now let's go ahead and do our multiplication. So what I've got here is y equals -4 plus 8 minus 1. -4 plus 8 minus 1 is going to give me y equals 3. That's not my answer. Remember, my answer for my vertex is an ordered pair. X was 2, right there. Y is 3, and that is going to be my vertex. Now there's one more thing that I want to show you before we're done, and that's what you would do in a situation like this. Okay, if you look at this carefully, I can see my a value, the number in front of my x² term, is going to be 4. My b value is the number that comes in front of my x term. If I look at this equation, I don't have any x's, so the b value has to be 0. My c is always the number that's by itself, so my c is 6. A lot of times kids will get confused and they'll think this is a because it's first and this is b because it's second. It doesn't have to do with being first or second. A is always in front of x², b is always in front of x. So when it comes to plugging in now, x equals -b, well, b is 0. Okay, so -0 is really just 0. We don't have a -0 over 2 times a. Oops. So what we get when we simplify this, we get x equals 0 over 8. Well, anytime you have 0 over 8, anything you have 0 over anything, it means your answer is 0. So x equals 0. Okay, so don't worry if one of your values, a, b, or c, is 0. You can still do your problem. Now, to find a vertex, we're going to take this again, and now we're going to plug into it. So y is going to equal 4, and my x value is 0, so I've got 0 squared plus 6. Well, 0 squared is 0 times 0, and 0 times 0, oops. So I've got 4 times 0 plus 6. Well, anything times 0 is 0, so I just have y equals 6 here. Now to write my vertex, my x value is 0, my y value is 6, so my vertex is the ordered pair 0, 6. So remember, axis of symmetry is always written as an equation, vertex always written as an ordered pair.